Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another insightful episode of the Scholars Table. In this episode, if you're preparing for a PhD or you are likely to submit your application this cycle, then this episode is really for you. We are excited to have with us a very special guest who is the Dr. Charles Armstrong Chair and Professor in Epidemiology. I've been trying to get her to join us at the Scholars Table for over a year, and we've been able to make that happen. So thank you to her for really finding the time to join us. So Professor Shruti Mehta is the first female chair of the Department of Epidemiology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. If you're not aware, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School, especially the Department of Epi, is the oldest department and consistently has been ranked as the best department of epidemiology for a very long time. She's an esteemed leader in infectious disease epidemiology, especially with her extensive contributions to global health research in areas of HIV and hepatitis. So we are particularly honored to have her discuss the PhD application process and what it takes to be a very strong candidate. So without wasting much time, let's welcome our guest to the Scholars Table. As I said earlier, today it's a special episode. We have the chair of the Department of Epidemiology with us today to discuss issues of graduate school application and also public health in general. It's been a while trying to get her on the podcast, so we are really honored to have her join us today. Professor Shruti, thank you so much for joining us. We much appreciate your time.
No, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So I want to begin with more like your academic background and professional journey. I've read quite a lot about you, but I want our audience to get a feel of, how special your journey has been. So if you could kindly share your journey, how you ended up in public health and epidemiology, especially from that point till now being the first female chair for the best department in the world.
No, thank you. I would be happy to share, especially because, as many of you are thinking about applying for graduate school, just knowing that I once sat in your shoes. So when I was actually an undergraduate, there was no public health major. So I honestly don't think I knew what epidemiology was at the time. I chose pre-med for probably the same reason that many in my generation did. I was good at math and science. My father was a physician. I saw how his career satisfied him, and so that was a path that I thought was right for me. But when I graduated, the standard path, particularly for an Indian American like myself, would have been to apply straight for medical school.
Yeah.
But I wanted to take a couple of years off. And I wasn't honestly sure. Was it medical school? I was a studio art major actually in undergraduate. So I even thought about advertising for a moment or two. And as a first generation Indian, it wasn't a common thing at that time to take time off, to figure out what you wanted to do. But I needed the time to figure out whether it was med school or something else. I hadn't planned for this. So when I graduated from Northwestern, I was an undergraduate at Northwestern, I literally knocked on doors to get a research job, to figure out if this was the path. And so I found an assistant professor at the time who was working in cardiovascular disease, who thankfully for me recognized my potential, gave me a job making $8.50 an hour, and I became her research coordinator, and I basically did everything for her. So I almost learned about epidemiology by accident, right? I was hungry to learn more about what I was doing in my job, and I wanted to be better at my job because I was essentially seeing research participants, I was implementing protocols, I was even doing some data analysis. I was starting to learn to ask scientific questions, but I wanted to do better. So I found a course in clinical epidemiology at the medical school, and I took it. And at the same time, another faculty member I worked for loaned me a copy of And the Band Played On. And so I read about the HIV pandemic. And it's really those two things together that brought me to Hopkins and really set the stage for my career. So the clinical epi course for me, epidemiology just fit. You know, when you find that thing that you know is right for you, right? It's a quantitative science, but it's about problem solving, asking
Yeah.
questions. There's no real right or wrong. And at the same time, I think the and the band played on. It was the early days of the HIV epidemic. It kind of stimulated my interest, this intersection of biology and social barriers and stigma and all of the challenges in the pandemic at that time. Those two interactions, you know, just the unknowns, pushed me into public health. So at the end of that 2 years, I found myself applying to MPH programs, and I found myself at Hopkins. And you know, the rest, as they say, is history. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so after you came back for your MPH at Hopkins, you've never left.
I never left. Nope, I went straight through. Yeah,
Wow.
Hopkins has a way of keeping you here. You know, you think, I can promise you that when I came here, I thought it was my 11-month MPH degree, and then I was going to go back to Chicago. That was my plan. But I stayed because I was hungry for knowledge. I knew that I needed to learn more to actually do more. And then I stayed because of people and the opportunities that were available to me at Hopkins. So every turn of my career, you know, I thought of leaving or going somewhere else, but I was working with such amazing people and I had more questions to ask. So I found myself staying really at every turn.
Great, great, great. Well, congrats on your new appointment. I think it's been an amazing journey. Deservedly so. So as the new chair, what is your vision for the department the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. I mean, my vision is really about a simple goal. It's about improving lives and reducing inequities here at home in Baltimore, across the US, and globally through epidemiologic investigation, intervention, innovation, and training. You know, so for me, it's really about how do we innovate the systems and the supports in our infrastructure to support the best research, teaching, practice, to kind of harness all the creativity that's here, enhance our community, and stimulate, you know, innovative science. Really, but the end goal is about improving lives.
Yeah, saving
Yeah.
lives. Uh, but in your opinion, what do you think are some of the critical areas of research that perhaps epidemiology in general should be looking into?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, you know, I hate to, I struggle to highlight one specific area because I think that, you know, one thing about this department and the field, the breadth and the depth of what we do is incredible. And so
Yeah.
I think all the work that goes on in the department are incredibly important. But as I look ahead to the next 5 to 10 years, some of the challenges that I think about are, you know, of course, the aging of our population. That's here in the US, but across the world, and all of the challenges that come with that. So increased cardiovascular disease, increased cancer, healthcare systems that aren't necessarily prepared to deal with this level of aging, and then the external threats, you know, that we face as a society. So, of course, climate change. We've been through one pandemic in COVID-19, but we're not, you know, we're not sure about when the next one will be and the impacts of that, and are we better prepared this time than we were last time? I think about health inequities, you know, and just these systemic health inequities that I think COVID-19 again exacerbated and just highlighted as challenges across all the health outcomes that we study. I think about the opportunities in some of the new tools that we have at our disposal, and how we as epidemiologists and as public health practitioners have a responsibility to use them. So, of course, big data and artificial intelligence, and how can we leverage that to answer some of the important questions that we have, but also ensure that we're implementing tools in an ethical way.
Yes, I think that the ethical component is it's very important, and I've seen a lot of programs or a lot of schools trying to adjust their curricula, adjust their approach of teaching based on what we have currently in terms of artificial intelligence. And I think that it's an interesting area to look at, see how the field evolves around it. Yeah, so I want us to look at the PhD application process. I know it's another cycle of application. I get a lot of questions about what it means to send a cold email and the purpose of cold emailing. And I also know like several programs have different ways of viewing cold emails. But in your opinion, how important do you think cold emails are in the PhD application process? Maybe in general, and then we would specifically talk about the impact of cold emails in the Department of Epi at Johns Hopkins.
Yeah, so I think it's incredibly important both at Hopkins and at other institutions to make those connections with faculty and the programs before you apply, so that it can be part of the consideration process. So I think that's important across the board. I know that it's challenging sometimes for students to send a cold email to someone that they've never met before, and it's intimidating, but I think that faculty expect these. So I do think that it's something that we're used to, and most faculty will respond to you. And I think it's the best way to try and understand whether faculty have projects that PhD students could work on. And again, I think it's important not only for students to identify whether the institution or a faculty member is right for them, but it's also an important step for faculty members in the institution in knowing whether the students are a right match for the institution.
Okay. But in terms of its impact on the application process itself, I know, so for example, some programs would make it a requirement that you need to identify an advisor before you apply. But I don't know if it's like that at Hopkins. But for some programs, it's more like you have to identify someone who is willing to work with you before you even apply.
Yeah, it's increasingly the case at Hopkins. It's increasingly the case in programs. So I would really strongly encourage you to identify someone or an area that you are interested in working on before you apply, and actually indicate that in your application, right? So it's the cold email, having the conversation with someone, and then including that in your application. Is it a requirement? No, but it is strongly encouraged.
Encouraged. Okay. All right. That's good. So what would you say is the best time to reach out to potential advisors? And especially in a department where maybe some of the faculty may be very busy. How do you handle follow-ups if you don't get immediate response?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, is the earlier the better in some ways, but the question is how early, right? So I would say summer is a difficult time, so August would not be the time that I would reach out to anyone, but I would say early in the fall, because that's when departments are starting to think about admission season, right? The admission season starts in about kind of November, December. So if you start in September, that gives you enough time to kind of get on someone's calendar. And in terms of follow-up, so first of all, if someone doesn't email you back, don't be offended. It's not about you. I think everyone, one of the things I say often as chair is that email is going to be, the death of us all. We've got to figure out some way to manage our email. So if someone doesn't respond to you, it's not that they're not responding to you. It's just that their email inbox is too full. So don't take it personally. And I think most people are fine. I even say this to students: if you haven't heard from me in a week, write me again. It's okay. Now, don't write someone the next day, because that will drive someone crazy. But if you haven't heard from someone in a week, go ahead and write back. If you write a couple times and you don't hear back, then it might just not be the right match, and maybe there's just something else going on. The other thing within our department, you can also write the academic program coordinator.
Okay.
Right. Who can help you in that case if you're trying to reach someone or trying to make a match. That can be helpful for our department, and I'm sure other departments.
Yes, and as you rightly said, I think not getting a response, it's not really an indication that you shouldn't apply. I mean, so for me, when I sent a couple of emails, I didn't get like a response from everybody, but a couple of them responded. So when I finally came in and I met them, they were like, "I thought you sent us You sent me an email, but I didn't get the time to respond. So sorry about that. So I don't
Yeah.
think, yeah, as you said, you don't expect to receive emails, response from every person you send emails to.
Yeah.
I know you've had opportunity to mentor students. You received a lot of cold emails. In your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that you think students make when they are writing cold emails?
Okay, so it's important to be brief and to the point, right? So not too long, not multi-paragraph emails, just be really clear about why you're emailing. The other issue is being too generic, right? You don't want to write one email and cut and paste it and send it to three or four different people. You want to try and personalize that email. Select select people where there's a reason that you're writing to them. Read about
Mm-hmm.
them, read a paper. So make it specific to their research project or their work or why you're interested in working with them. The more that you do that, the more likely you are to get a response.
Is it possible for faculty to like share like cold emails with other faculty?
Meaning, is it possible to share when if they get an email from someone to share with oh God, to share with someone else?
Yes.
Do you mean are people going to realize that the same email got sent to everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think because sometimes, right? The other thing is that we work together and collaboratively. So it may not even be done in that spirit. You might say, "Oh, I received this email from someone who actually might be a better fit for you." Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I oftentimes actually do forward because, again, mostly you're trying to help the student find a match. Right.
Yeah.
And it could be very possible that someone sends you an email that might be a better fit with another faculty member.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. I think those are very, very important considerations. I know people who literally send email to everybody in the department,
Uh,
without being
yeah.
specific. Um,
And that's a challenge, right? I think you really want to think about it's not going to improve your chances, right? To send an email to everyone. Really think about the people that you want to work with or who match your interests.
okay. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting um, those errors.
Yeah.
We've looked at cold emails. I want us to look at the application process itself.
Mhm.
Um, I know, like PhD, it's super competitive. The number of slots is less than what you typically get at the master's level. I know for Hopkins, MPH, they take about 200, 250 per cohort, but PhD is extremely low. What would you say are the typical numbers like in the department, especially EP department?
It's incredibly competitive. I mean, we get hundreds of applicants. We get sometimes 400 applicants, and our PhD classes are on average about 12 to 14 students a year. So that gives you a sense of how competitive it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, I
And
know.
and I'll just say, because I think we get many more qualified applicants than we can admit. So it's again the importance of not being discouraged if it doesn't work out the first time around.
Mhm. Has there been any situation where you conclude that this student may be overqualified?
That a student may be overqualified, that has been rare. I mean, I think that we sometimes have gotten some very experienced students, who make a good case for why they want a PhD in epidemiology. I think it's rare that we've turned someone down for being overqualified.
Okay.
And I think some of those senior students that come in with all that experience, it's really rewarding for the rest of the class.
Okay. Great. Um, so so for the components, right? What would you say are the most important components of your PhD application? Um, w- like
I
which
mean,
element? Yes.
it's the whole package, to be honest. But I think that, in your statement, being clear about why epidemiology. I know that seems like such a simple thing. Obviously you might say I'm applying to a Department of Epidemiology, but really be clear about why you need or want a PhD in epidemiology and how it's going to change your career. The work experience, having experience in the field is really important.
Hmm.
Publications can be a part of that experience. They don't have to be there, but they can help. Epi is a quantitative science. So having some quantitative courses or background or doing well in those quantitative courses is important. And then, of course, the letters of recommendation really coming from people that know you well and can speak to how you might succeed in the program. So really all of it, I have to say. But I
Yeah.
think that I start with that really important piece of you want from your application for it to be clear why you're pursuing a PhD in epidemiology.
Yeah, yeah. So I think answering that question, it's very, very important.
Yeah.
So for a statement of purpose that truly reflects or answers these questions, what are some of the key elements that you've noticed in reviewing multiple personal statements? What element of a statement have you read that really stood out? That this is
Yeah.
really a compelling statement of purpose.
Yeah, and I say this a lot when I teach as well, and this is almost with everything you do, but tell a story. Tell a story. That statement is an opportunity to tell your story again in a concise way. Kind of what brought you to this point.
Hmm.
Highlight not necessarily every single experience that you've had, but the collective and how that brings you to where you are at this moment. And then again, what this degree is going to do for you. Where do you want to go next? And then there's that other piece that I mentioned too. It's related to the cold emails that you asked about. Both where you go next is also about who you work with when you
Yes.
come to the department. And I think being specific about that, whether it's one or two people that you've either spoken with or their work speaks to you, something about them, I think is really important to highlight in the statement. And I think one of the mistakes on the flip side that I've seen is when someone lists, just like you mentioned, that some people may send an email to the entire department, don't list seven different faculty that work in different areas, right? Because that looks a little bit unfocused.
Hmm. Okay. So yeah, so that I think that also goes into the common mistakes that
Yeah.
people make in writing SOPs. So I would say the first one is um listed a lot of faculty in your personal statement. What are some of the common mistakes that you've identified in applicants who like in a personal statement or statement of purpose that you've read or reviewed?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is kind of the flip side of what I said was the most important, which is why epidemiology. Sometimes we
Hmm.
can't see that in the statement, right? Why the
Okay.
match with epidemiology? It seems like a better fit for a different degree. And then sometimes there are lots of stories in a statement, but there's no clear thread, just kind of a laundry list of all of the things. It doesn't need to be your CV, right? The statement just isn't a recap of exactly what's in your CV or resume. So really being deliberate about the stories that you tell to kind of, to lead to this larger purpose. And then I already mentioned this too, listing a bunch of faculty without a real connection to what you're doing. It just looks like maybe, a student maybe went to the website and picked a bunch of people. So I think really being thoughtful about who you want to work with, again, it'll serve you well.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but when it comes to recommendation letters, what would you say are the some of the strong features of a good recommendation letter?
I think it sounds probably basic or silly, but someone who knows you well, right? So making sure that when you select someone to write a letter of recommendation, that they know you well, they know your work, they can speak to how you might perform in an epidemiology program, and that it's someone that you had a good relationship with. That's important too. To think about the work you did with that person and the type of relationship that you had. I think if you can, having someone who understands our field,
Hmm.
and can speak to
Yeah.
that. I recognize that people come from all sorts of different fields, and so the recommender may not actually be an epidemiologist or completely understand. But if you do have at least one in there who has a connection to epidemiology, can speak to the field, I think that can help.
Okay. Is there any impact on, for example, the length of the letter or the person's say title or position?
I think the length of the letter is a tricky one, right? So sometimes a really short letter that doesn't have much in content can be challenging, right? A letter doesn't have to be though 2 pages long to be very good. It can be a few paragraphs and be impactful. So I don't want to put a requirement on the length, but something that's really short and not kind of specific to the student's characteristics or their fit, I think would be potentially less successful. In terms of rank or title, I think that again, it's more it's that, but it's really the relationship with the applicant. Obviously,
Yeah.
people, faculty and schools that we know, or colleagues that someone who is reviewing the application might have impact, but I don't think that that's the major factor. It's really about the relationship to the applicant and being able to speak to the applicant.
Okay. Um, all right. Because I've had instances where people reach out and they said my my recommender, it's like um say a classmate or and a colleague at work.
Yeah.
How is that, how is that viewed? um let's say we were the same uh research assistants on a project. Would it be a good idea for
Like a peer recommendation. It's not typical.
yeah.
It's not typical for what we see. Usually what we see is a supervisor, a mentor, a teacher. That's typically what we're looking for. I can see the value of peer recommendations. It's not a part of our application process right now. It's not the
Okay.
norm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
And I
right.
would say, you asked about someone's title and stature. So that's only valuable again if the person knows you well, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so asking for a recommendation from someone who may be in a high position but is not someone who knows you well isn't going to be as valuable as someone who might be more junior but knows you really well.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah. In terms of some other considerations, uh how common, I know that like it also depends on the number of people who apply, but how common are people with, say, only bachelors getting a PhD program at Hopkins? I know certainly it's been possible in some programs, but um how common is it to get a PhD straight from bachelor's uh, degree at Hopkins?
I think it's increasingly less common. I will say, I think just, we've already talked about how competitive it is these days and how few slots there are um, for each area department. And so I think it is less common. And the general expectation is that students come in with a master's. So I think the other piece of this is that we are a 4-year program. So in some ways, it's ideal to be able to hit the ground running, have some of that basic background knowledge, come in with some general ideas of area you want to focus in. So that's part of it. I think that it's not impossible. I'm not going to say that we've never taken someone straight from a bachelor's. We have, but it is increasingly less common.
Okay. So for those who are able to get into the PhD program with their bachelor's, what would you say are some of the maybe additional experiences or qualifications that strengthen the application?
Yeah, it's that work experience, right? So it's the flip
Okay.
side. So maybe they've had really excellent work experience, a lot of years in the field. Maybe they've got really excellent recommendations, or maybe they come from a specialized place. There are some areas I will say where in other schools it's more common to go straight from a bachelor's to a PhD program. Dynamic modeling, for example, is one area where in other programs it's very common for students to go straight from a bachelor's degree.
Yes.
So that may happen in our program, and again, although it's less common. But I would say the typical substitute is years of work experience.
Okay. 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 That explains it. Um, another concern or question that I've had is that most times students from example, say African institutions who had their masters from an African institution, um, typically don't get into the PhD programs. More often, they are given a repeat of the masters for some reason. I don't understand. What do you think are some of the rationale behind like those kind of um, outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say that we embrace a diverse and inclusive community, right? And we also have to recognize that people come with different experiences and different opportunities. And I hope that our admissions process recognizes that. I do think that we've had students that come in with an MBBS, for example, from another country, and master's programs from other countries without getting a master's degree at our institution or at a US based institution. So we have had those
Okay.
students come in. So I think that it's just, what we're looking for in the application is that someone has the background and the experience to succeed in our program, right? That's really important to us also. It's not just about, it's about, finding the right fit between, with a faculty mentor, but also ensuring that we're setting people up for success.
Okay. All right.
But again, I
So,
think but I go back to saying, I think we want to recognize that everyone comes with different experiences.
okay. All right. But in terms of research experience, I know that is also another aspect where
Yeah.
it's valued. But
Hmm.
for most international students, your research experience is
Yeah.
hardly something that they come by.
Yeah.
So for those type of applicants, how would how would they demonstrate their potential, or how would they make up for that limited experience and research?
Yeah, I think there are other types of experience, right? In some of those settings, there might be programmatic experience. It may not be research experience in the same vein that it might be for a US based student, but there's still other types of public health experience that I think would be relevant for our program. And in some ways, that type of experience can help prepare a student, maybe not for the quantitative aspects of the program, but for how to ask the other piece, which is about how you ask the right research questions. And sometimes coming from that field or program work can actually be really great for that part of the training. So I think
Okay.
that it's not, there's not one phenotype of experience that we're looking for in a candidate, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
recognize that there are people that are coming, working in research for a number of years, and there are other people that might have been working as a practitioner for years.
Okay.
And those are
All
both
right.
valued.
Yeah. Okay. Another aspect that I think has increasingly become more like an obstacle to some applicants is that they keep asking, I don't have a publication, should I apply? So in the PhD application process, how important are publications? How are they valued in um,
Yeah, I think they're one component of the application. Like I said early on, right, when I was saying the elements of a successful application, I think in some ways a publication shows that you can take something from start to finish. In some ways, sometimes the publications are currency of sorts. They show that you can finish a project. Are they the only thing we look for? Again, I feel like I'm saying the same thing a couple of different times. It's not just one, there's not a formula for what works. It's not that you have to have this many publications and that someone without publications is not going to get into the program. I think it's just a balance across all of the different other components of the application. So do they help you? Yes, absolutely. Having publications or conference presentations or abstracts does help, but it's not the only criteria that we look at.
okay. So for those who have publications, are all publications regarded equal, or like if you have a publication in, let's say, JAMA, and someone has a publication in maybe a local journal, how does that play part in their admissions process?
I mean, we consider the totality of it, right? And we also have to consider the field that someone's in, because some things are going to be more likely to be published in JAMA and other things are not.
Hmm.
But I would say at the level of PhD applications, having a publication on your CV, and particularly a first author publication, is going to be valued regardless of where it's published. I think we will think about the journals and the scope of that work and how much the individual may have contributed to that publication, but there's not a grading scale, for one journal for versus another.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
that's fair. Yeah, so I think we've exhausted a lot of the questions that I've been having for from students. But before we go, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the interview process. Um, so how should students approach the PhD interview? Um, what are some of the things that maybe programs are looking for once they enlist you for interview?
Yeah, I think here it's the opportunity to talk about your interests. So it's different. We again often teach this in our doctoral seminar. There's the written word versus the spoken and how you interact. So I think that we're looking for, again, those same pieces, for you to be able to articulate why epidemiology, for you to have thought about the program and have questions about the program during the interview process. So being curious, and being able to articulate what you are interested in and why you're interested in it. So it's a lot of the same pieces. And I think many probably find the interview process even more challenging than the written application, right? Because
Yeah.
you're put on the spot. And so I would say, it's another, we often, when we write, we make draft after draft and we perfect it, right? But when we prepare for an interview, how do we prepare for that interview? So I suggest this to students
Yeah.
for an oral exam. Prepare by practicing with someone. Actually have a friend ask you questions, or record yourself as you're responding
Mm-hmm.
to questions, because I think it can be challenging, right, to articulate some of these things in words when you're on the spot. Answering them, but take the time to think through. But I think it's really about these same questions, and I think it speaks to the point of really being thoughtful and deliberate about why you're applying for a PhD in epidemiology and knowing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. What are your final thoughts of advice to prospective students or current PhD students in the
Yeah.
field of public health, especially epi?
Yeah, I think, for prospective students or students really anywhere, you are entering a really important field at a really important time. I'd say that epidemiology is one of the core disciplines of public health.
Yeah.
And I think that there are so many public health challenges facing us. I talked about some of them today. And I think as an epidemiologist in training, you have an important role to play in addressing all of those. And so, things that I like to say: be curious, be bold, be innovative, and be persistent. And I said this at the outset and a couple of times when you asked about the application process. It is a competitive process.
Yeah.
So be persistent and don't be discouraged, right? If at the first time it doesn't work out, keep at it if it's what you really want to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think when I applied the first time, it didn't go
Yeah.
as I anticipated. I
Yeah.
interviewed, but it didn't go well. But the second time, it worked well. So rejection is part of it's part of the
Rejection
process.
is part of life, right? We learn, I think we take it really hard, or we may think that we have to go in a different direction, but I think we can also learn from it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, beyond the department, what legacy do you hope to at least leave as chair of the oldest and the best department in the world? After your tenure, what would you like to see?
Yeah, it's a tough question, right? Because the department is an amazing place already, as you know, being a student here, right? The work that goes on here, it's incredible. Our faculty, our staff, our students, it's really phenomenal. And, every individual person, and I think we as a collective have impact. So when I think about what I want my impact to be, my goal is really to leave something a bit better than when I came, so, and that's what I want to do for the department. It's what I want to do for my own research and for public health. I'd say that, I guess, as a department and in public health, I'd like to see us ask the big questions and the hard questions, not shy away from them, not necessarily ask the questions we already know the answers to, but I'd like to also see us as a department and as a field reach outside of our comfort zone, to
Mm-hmm.
be bold. I said be bold already when it came to students, and to try and, speed up the pace a little bit of what we do. Everything is moving fast, right?
Yeah.
Technology is
Mm-hmm.
changing, data is
Yeah.
changing. We have these incredible tools at our fingertips, and sometimes we still get slowed down by our own bureaucracy and some of the other challenges we face. So I think just trying to figure out ways to overcome that so that we can move at the pace that we need to be a part of the solution. And so I'd like to see us as a department, as a field, just continue to innovate in everything we're doing, everything from research to practice to teaching, because, this today was about PhD applications, and
Yeah.
so much of what we do here in the department is about training the next generation,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for finally making it to the podcast.
Sorry it took so long.
Thank you so much. I truly appreciate your time.
Thank you for
I
having
wish
me.
you all the best in your new role. I know how
Thank you.
difficult it is. Or I perceive how difficult it is given how renowned the department is and the amazing work that you've done. But we wish you all the best. We'll give you all the support that you need. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me today.